SimCopter may well be my favorite bad game. Yes, let's get that out of the way right now. This is a bad game on nearly every technical level. Yet I love it and had tons of fun playing through it. Debuting back in 1996, SimCopter was one of the few sim games released by Maxis during that period which actually had the touch of Will Wright, their ace designer whose late career with the company, beginning with this title, seemed to be more about wrestling with corporate bigwigs to get resources for his ideas than actually making games. The result is wholly expected. A game with many great ideas which wound up a mockery of a finished product. One not helped by a silly controversy started by a disgruntled developer which doesn't really affect the game today, so I won't get into it. But what is SimCopter? What is this about? Very basically, for those of you who've played SimCity 2000, remember that tiny helicopter running around who'd occasionally pipe in, "That's you. You are a helicopter pilot apparently hired by the city as a be-all emergency services respondent. You begin career mode choosing a city, having a selection of 3 level 1, or easy, missions. After selecting your city, you're given a short, pre-rendered fly-through of the city which looks far prettier than anything in the game proper. A loading screen later and you're left standing in all your heavily pixelated glory before a blocky hangar with $1,000 in a dinky little helicopter called a Schweitzer 300. At this point, you'll probably notice 2 things. One is that the graphics are horrendous. 2 is that the view distance is just as horrendous. Luckily, the latter can be increased by a good deal in the options menu, but nothing will ever make this look good. The designers seem to understand this, and so, to somewhat cover this up, every level looks like a cool, stormy day, or night, with gray skies and not a speck of blue or yellow to be found. It does the trick a little, but as the old adage goes, it's putting lipstick on a pig. Buildings are blocky and often lack textures, terrain lacks detail, people are massive pixels, and I don't even want to guess what some of the animals are supposed to be. Fortunately, they seem to spend a good deal of time on the stars of the show, the helicopters. Far smoother than anything else in the game, these things look like something close to passable, even if the textures are rather, gaudy. But more on these later. So you load up the game and are thrust into the ugly, even for the time, world of SimCopter. And after the initial shock of just how ugly everything is, seriously, this is not a pretty world to look at, you're left to figure out how everything controls. As a pilot on the ground, everything feels slippery. I suspect very little design went into this, between the hilarious walking animation and the fact that you move like a helicopter. That's right, you move like a helicopter. As in, you have momentum when you move forward, back, and even when turning. So much momentum, in fact, that if you turn too quickly, you might find yourself mistakenly performing a 180. A bit odd, but fortunately you won't be spending much time outside the helicopter. In fact, you only have 2 controls when outside your helicopter: movement and enter your helicopter. That's it. You don't even have the ability to look manually. You spend a few seconds figuring this little bit out and it's off to the shitster, a slow, weak, poorly equipped bare-bones chopper with room for 2 more, somehow. But it's your helicopter, so it's lovely. Helicopters all generally control the same, with a simplistic scheme that may take some getting used to. There's no real mouse control, for instance, though you can use your mouse to manually click on individual functions in case you forget their hotkeys. Instead, everything that happens is on your keyboard. And once you get the hang of these controls, it performs surprisingly. Movement is simple and the helicopters perform well, mostly, utilizing fairly simplistic climb, lower, forward, back, and strafe controls. It straddles the line well between arcadey simplicity and quasi-realistic weightiness without becoming annoying, though exceptions do occur. More on this later. As for everything else, it all has its own simplistic control scheme that's easy to reach and utilize, from lowering and raising your bucket or harness to shooting off tear gas or your water cannon, to the many different orders you'll be calling out to Sims and emergency services. You even get to control your camera angle and spotlight position, And though the latter is questionably useful, it's quite nice being able to manually set multiple presets for different camera angles, especially as your missions become more demanding and fine control far more necessary. But that's all getting ahead of the game. Your Schweitzer 300 comes equipped with a little more than a megaphone and a bucket, and at this stage you'll be needing a little more as you learn to utilize these most basic of equipments. The bucket is obvious, drop it into water and it fills. Then, should you be over a fire, you can dump water on it. The megaphone is going to be your bread and butter throughout the game though. This is how you call dispatchers such as ambulances, fire trucks, and police cars for situations you want help with. It's also how you order about the everyday Sims wandering the streets, from dispersing rioters or Sims congregating around dangerous positions to telling criminals to halt, to even just wishing everyone a nice day, the latter of which has a tendency to cause mass confusion and injury for reasons. At this stage of the game though, you'll mostly just be using it to disperse traffic. The early game doesn't tend to throw anything heavy at you, setting you up against tiny traffic jams which you disperse with a click of your megaphone, to shuttling people in your glorified taxi cab. The most intense you'll see is medevacs, where you must carry injured Sims into your helicopter to drop them off in a hospital roof before they perish, or dispatch an ambulance or grab a paramedic to do the legwork for you. As well as the rare small fire, which if they aren't put out in time may eventually destroy the building or area they spawned on. Most of these events will be called in over a dispatcher, where an icon will show up on your map, but every so often you might find a problem which hasn't been called in, or has yet to be. Most often this is a speeder, whose screeching tires will announce their presence from a mile away. But it's not uncommon to hear a small traffic buildup or even find a small fire or injured Sim. And of course there are more severe random events you might be called in for, but generally won't be penalized against, notably plane, train, and car crashes, only one of which tends to even show up on your map. Complete an event and you'll receive a monetary and point reward proportionate to the size of the event. Transport more people and you'll get more money and points. Same with rescuing more injured or putting out larger fires. Save up money and eventually you'll be able to buy better equipment and helicopters. Gather enough points and you'll graduate from your current city, get some fireworks and an increasingly large band, and strangely smaller bonus, to celebrate your achievement, and we'll have another few to select from. Generally, the latter comes well before the former, and barring you religiously hunting down non-mission events like speeders, it'll be 2 or 3 missions before you can afford your next helicopter. And so the game continues on, each new level of city bringing with it just a bit more difficulty, whether it be from more technically challenging events to events which require certain upgrades, to there simply being more events being thrown at you at once with fewer breaks in between. It doesn't take long, for instance, for there to be criminals wandering the streets for you to sick police onto, or crash your helicopter on top of, whichever you prefer. Eventually, these on-foot arsonists and muggers will become burglars who speed around in cars and require a dedicated police chase, a spray of water, or a crash from your chopper to pull over. Or there's the basic rooftop rescues, which can eventually upgrade to boat rescues, where individuals are stranded on capsized boats in pitching seas, which can be trying to coordinate with. This in turn will eventually upgrade to train rescues, where people are trapped on top of a speeding train and you need to fish them off. Even transports and fires get tougher, requiring you to taxi around up to 5 people rather than the 1 or 2 from the start, while entire skyscrapers can be caught in roaring infernos rather than the occasional patch of dirt. Then don't even get me started on the riots. The game provides everything you need to solve these issues relatively quickly and efficiently, though it does require an amount of skill and patience to get the hang of, and it's easy to be overwhelmed. Unfortunately, once stuck in a rut of being overwhelmed, it can be difficult dragging yourself out, and while most cities can be safely completed easily within 20 minutes, if you find yourself falling behind, that time can be extended practically indefinitely, as failure to complete missions in a timely manner can result in a barrage of negative points. Though never negative cash unless you directly cause injury or damage. But as said, upgrades go a long way in helping us and come in 2 forms. First is your equipment upgrades. things you buy which only require your initial purchasing before they're made available to all your current and future aircraft at your disposal, with one notable exception. Your megaphone and bucket come standard, though there is the option to sell and buy these back, for whatever masochistic reason. The harness is utilized to rescue people in tricky spots, notably rooftop rescues when the poor soul gets stuck in the side of a building. The water cannon allows you to shoot out a spray of water in front of you in a disappointingly short-range stream, which is nonetheless far more controllable and easier to handle than the bucket method. Finally, tear gas is your last resort for dispersing rioters. And that's it. Yes, I know, seems like it should be useful for general criminals. It's not. Seems they're about the only ones immune to the damn things, even. More notable than the equipment, or really anything, is the helicopters. These are real stars here, and it shows, with each lovingly crafted, if not textured, to a level of detail far beyond that of anything else in the city. Your standard Schweitzer 300 is the worst at everything, and though it'll get the job done, you'll be looking for an upgrade quickly. The Jet Ranger is that upgrade, and flying this thing after the shit stir is like taking a weight off your shoulders you never even knew was there until it was gone. With better capacity and handling stability and much more speed, it'd be hard to guess that it's the second worst chopper in the game. To be fair though, the McDonnell Douglas 500 isn't anywhere close to as large a leap, basically just being slightly faster and more stable. The MD 520 is where they begin changing up the upgrade formula a bit. While it has the same seating capacity as the 500 and is again a slight bit faster, it has less water capacity and is less overall stable. Issues more than made up for by its extraordinary agility and shortest rotors in the game by far. From here though, we're getting less into gradual upgrades and more into the specialists. The last four main choppers are the kings of the game, each having a specialty they're best at. The Bell 212, for instance, is a workhorse. Large and relatively slow, it can take a beating, can carry more passengers than you will ever approach, and has enormous water stores, useful for retaining the constant store and retaining stability. More on this a bit later. If you're fighting a lot of fires and riots, this flying whale will do the trick. Problem is just getting there in time. Not a problem shared by the Augusta, which is a faster chopper in the game, bar none. Don't take that to mean it's a slouch aside from that either. It has a capacity significantly larger than the first four choppers. Still, it can struggle with more intense events, though getting across large cities and multitasking is never easier. The Dolphin, meanwhile, is like combining the best of the Bell and the Augusta to make for an aircraft without weakness. It may be therefore considered only somewhat arguably the best helicopter in the game. While it doesn't have quite the sheer capacity or speed of the prior two, it's not far off from either, allowing it to easily handle any task the game throws at you. Thus, the Explorer may seem like a disappointment if and when you get your hands on it, being the most expensive helicopter in the game and the last listed. The Explorer has a capacity more comparable to the Augusta without quite reaching the same speed. Where it makes up ground is in the handling, being the most stable aircraft you can control, as well as featuring fantastic acceleration which might even outstrip the Augusta. Still, odd that it's the most expensive helo in the game, though I'd hardly call that the oddest aspect of buying and selling. Before we get into the economy though, there is one final star to the title. The secret helicopter you can only get your hands on by entering cheat codes or find it hidden within the level. The Apache is a beautiful beast, with limited usefulness. With missiles and guns which replace your tear gas and water cannons, and no ability to host passengers, the usefulness of this chopper is limited. Sure, it can take out pesky criminals with its guns, if you can aim it straight. There's a reason these things can be manually aimed independently in reality, and you can technically complete nearly all the events in the game utilizing dispatchers and a harness. The real use for this monstrosity comes in twofold: blowing up the world and destroying UFOs. The former has its own brand of cathartic entertainment to it, but the latter is what the Apache was built for. Non-mission events which appear in cities that happen to have this helicopter hidden in them. UFOs cause widespread chaos and panic, starting fires and otherwise being a pain in the ass. The only solution for dealing with them? 10 missiles or 100 bullets. Which can be a bit of a problem in some of the largest cities, honestly. The number of events can build up fast without help from these nuisances, and the Apache can be difficult to find, often hidden in the middle of a bunch of skyscrapers or otherwise not readily accessible locations. Anyway, back to the economy and, well, back to the criticism. To put it simply, the economy here is broken. See, when you buy aircraft upgrades, you buy them for all the aircraft, meaning there's no reason for there to be a sell function. And as for the helicopters, you sell for the same price as you buy, meaning you can move straight through the helicopters and grab your preferred favorite without having to save up by only around the 7th or 8th city in the game, when you can wind up playing up to 19. So yeah, progression is pretty non-existent here, and at no point will you be facing money concerns unless you somehow blow your starter helicopter in the very first city of the game. I wish I could say that's the last of the issues with the game, but no. Perhaps the most flagrant is the collision boxes. They are not good, and it's not uncommon to run smack into an invisible wall which sticks a few feet past a skyscraper. Not helping this is aircraft stability. It seems helicopters have a general stability stat which degrades based on how much space your water carry capacity is taking and how much damage your helicopter has taken. The way this affects you is that your helicopter will randomly swing around as if stuck in a strong wind. At low levels this is manageable, but too much damage and or water will have your helicopter doing complete 180s no matter how hard you fight the control. Not to mention make it nearly impossible to land the vehicle safely, as your helicopter needs to remain relatively flat and against flat terrain, else be knocked back into the air somehow. Mixed together, these all can hurt quickly. But then you add that on top of event spawns and you get some real trouble. Now it is worth mentioning that this isn't an issue in the pre-patch version of the game for some reason, but the pre-patch version has its own issues which make the late game nigh unplayable. Anyway, the game has a tendency to spawn certain events in inconvenient locations. Sometimes the game manages to find workarounds for this, like when they allow transport sims and paramedics to walk directly through buildings. Other times it's not so easy, like when they put a rooftop rescue on the middle of the side of a skyscraper with no safe approach, or worse, a criminal who spawns inside of a wall or underneath the geometry, which makes for a persistent event which can never be resolved and consistently loses you points. That last one being tied to the issue of police AI, which seems half-finished even for this game. The police officers you pick up have issues navigating the people and terrain, an issue the paramedics solve by being programmed to go through collisions when an alternate route cannot be found, leaving police often walking into walls endlessly rather than catching criminals. Oh, they even have trouble with your helicopter, being both resistant to enter and desiring to leave every time you get close to the ground, even when there's no criminals present. Issues the paramedic AI does not share. It's like they updated one and forgot to transfer the fixes over to the other. Though to be somewhat fair, both do have issues letting go. In the rare case that you wish to kick one of them out, usually for a transport or rescue mission which requires more seats, they tend to get right back in. The most consistent solution to this, amusingly, being throwing them out mid-air, which may kinda sorta kill them. But at least they won't try to shove their way back into your helicopter while paramedics are trying to make room for critically injured sims. Then there's more general criticisms, like how the pathfinding for dispatches is ridiculous and can waste an enormous amount of time out of sheer AI stupidity, or the riots, which are an unclear mess of an event. The most complex mission in the game, riots need to be resolved quickly and in correct order to maximize profits, or even earn any profits at all. So first you must try to break them up with your megaphone, which doesn't work. Then you spray them with water, which somewhat kinda works. Finally, you hit them with tear gas, which knocks them on their ass. and injures all nearby Sims not part of the ride, which, since you've had to use the first two dispersal methods, tends to be quite a few. It's sloppy, but I'll admit it's nice to see a unique event which must be resolved with so much care. Of course, riots are also what pretty well breaks the pre-patched version. See, in the unpatched version, riot missions don't appear on your map. Considering how difficult I've stated they are to resolve even when working correctly, the amount of collateral they tend to cause, traffic jams and fires, which also tends to add rooftop rescues on top of the obvious medevac issues, makes the late game basically unplayable. But why even mention the pre-patched version? Well, did I mention that SimCopter is abandonware? Yeah, the game is maybe the most difficulty I've had trying to get a title running, and that's saying something. Modern machines run way too fast for this one and will crash within seconds without a CPU frame limiter of some sort. And even then, the game isn't exactly stable. But then you have the patch, which is a 16-bit program, which means you can install the patch on 64-bit machines. To get this game to run correctly, I had to emulate Windows 95, install the game there, run the patcher, transfer the patch game onto my regular computer, and use a frame limiter program. A program which crashed the game during cutscenes, meaning I had to run the game without said program, save, restart with the modified version, and play through levels until the end before saving and restarting the unmodified version again. Yeah. But, was it worth it? I'd say so. Hell, I haven't even spoken about all the features the game offered. Aside from the campaign, they also give players a free mode to play around in cities of their choice. And that choice can be widespread, considering it gave players the option to transfer their own personalized cities into the game to play with from SimCity 2000. An entirely awesome addition. But that's just me. Despite the main faults of the game, I love the many aspects it brought to the table. And this doesn't even touch on the quirky radio humor and quality soundtrack with multiple stations reminiscent of Grand Theft Auto's radio, or the birth of the Simlish language most have grown to recognize from the Sims titles. But the problems here are many, and they are game-breaking. End of the day, this was an unfinished title. It's fun to think about this game had it been fully realized, with textures which loaded properly onto terrain or even existed in some places, more consistent AI, an economy that worked, and more NPCs to meet, more missions to accomplish. How cool would it have been to see old SimCity monsters wreaking havoc while you desperately tried to put out fires? Hell, they even have these underdeveloped sim moodlets for your few passenger pictures, which don't really do anything except give you a kick when you scare the socks off them by speeding past skyscrapers at a blistering pace. If you love flying, love the atmosphere from some of those sim titles back in the day, and would like to see SimCity from a different perspective, might be you could find some love for this game too. Otherwise, this game is a mess, and I wouldn't wish the issues of getting it to work properly upon my worst enemies.
Hey, you wanna upgrade your copter maybe?